Hey Metal Maniacs, Albert Bell from Sacro Sanctus here in Malta, and you're tuned into Dave Softee's Metal Meltdown on Metal Messiah Radio. Metal onwards, brothers.
Alrighty, Metal Maniacs, here we go. Please help me welcome to Metal Messiah Radio, hailing from Malta, near South Italy, from Blackened Heavy Doom metal band Albert Bell's Sacro, Sanctus, here to talk about the band's latest release, Sword of Fierbois, which came out September 30th, 2022, through Metal on Metal Records, based in Italy. Joining us, we have the very talented Albert Bell on guitars, bass, and vocal, leaving only Steve Lombardo as the drummer, not to be confused with Dave Lombardo. So, Albert, you pretty much do everything on the album except for the drums, so that's outstanding. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for this opportunity to reach out and to join your fantastic program, Metal Meltdown. Basically, the whole thing with Sacro Sanctus started out after, several years playing in different bands. I've got other bands, Forsaken, which is an established doom band in Malta, established way back in 1991. Then there's also Nomad Sun, which I co-founded with some other guys who were also interested in sort of combining doom metal with vintage sort of classic rock. We've got a heavy dose of organ in there, and then there's also recently I rejoined a former band of mine on guitars, not on bass, because my main instrument is the bass in effect. It's called Vandals or Ex-Vandals, and basically, after all these years playing in bands, I wanted to try something purely going solo, not restricted by other bands members' ideas, how it is, and everybody contributes, and sometimes your original idea gets mutilated in the process. It's not normally the case in my case with my bands, because we're all very respectful of each other's ideas, but I really wanted to have no restrictions, not being tied to any particular genre, even though there's all the elements you described in the beginning. And I wanted to be my vision from beginning to end, really. And so that's how Sacro Sanctus was born. Basically in 2011, I started penning a couple of demo tracks. And the initial idea wasn't that I would be singing or playing the guitar. I was originally thinking of farming those out to other musicians, but the studio I was using at the time was manned by a friend of mine, Chris Gregg, who also plays in Nomad Sun on guitars. And he told me they're sounding really convincing, so why don't you go the whole hog and do the guitars and all the vocals as well? At the time, I was also programming the drums, and then Chris used to quantize it. And then when we went into the studio proper, I hired a drummer. Originally, it was Robert Spiteri, a very sort of productive and very good drummer in the local music scene, but not essentially tied to heavy metal. So when it came to the third album, then I roped in Steve Lombardo, because he fits in perfectly with the style, He also plays in a punk band here called Batteries Not Included, BNI, and he got, sometimes I love that sort of punk metal feel as well on some of the tracks. I don't know if you noticed. And I wanted that type of drummer, who could really groove and sort of really feel that groove, that particular groove.
Yeah, I find that your album and your band has excellent musicianship, and it's hard to believe that you're playing basically everything except for the drums. So you put a lot of your own flavor into this, and I understand that this is what you want. You want to do your thing your way without interruptions, and you have 4 albums out there now. This is impressive, very impressive.
Thank you, Dave. At the same time, it's also a bit risky, because you're really bearing your soul and exposing, all your limitations at the same time. So, but I'm committed to the project, and I think it's really grown now from the first album to this album, Sword of Fierbois, which is the 4th Sacro Sanctus full length. And I think, objectively speaking, there's quite a progression over the 4 albums, and with this one we left no stone unturned, really, to create something which will hopefully have some sort of impact out there. Although ultimately for me, what's really important is that I'm happy with it, and I can say that I'm really pleased with how the album turned out.
It is very impressive, and I have been playing quite a bit off of it, and I'm looking forward to playing more of it, of course. And I just want to say, I noticed on your Facebook, it recently was your birthday, so I want to wish you a belated happy birthday.
Thank you. My 55th birthday.
That's a good number. Yeah, congratulations. Yeah, five is a good number. So double the five is double the fun, right? And so I would imagine that you do all the music, you do all the writing, you probably do everything yourself. Am I correct? Or what is the process like in getting your songs together?
No, basically what I do is I pen all the songs, music and lyrics. I normally start off just sketching some ideas, and then sort of building on those ideas and putting songs together. What I normally do with Sacro Sanctus is first is to develop the whole concept for the album, because all the 4 albums are concept albums, really. So then, based on the different sort of directions of the concept, I decide which tracks are best suited for the album, because I've got quite a lengthy list of songs, to be honest. I've just been really, I know it sounds a bit cliched, and perhaps I'm blowing my trumpets a bit, but I've been really productive incessantly over these past 10 years or so. Ever since I created this project, I've been writing. So there's also always a backlog of songs that I often revisit and say, look, this could be a good one for the next album. What I then do is create a short list of songs, and then another short list, because there's so many songs to choose from. And ultimately, when a song is included into the album, it moves in that way because it's reflective of the soundscape I want to create. So if it's a song, like Blood at Orleans on Sword of Fierbois, which is a mid-tempo bruiser, you need the riffs to accompany that. So that's how I decide which songs make it to the album then. But yeah, I start off normally either with a guitar or a bass, penning down some riffs. Normally it's with a guitar now. Then deciding on basically the drum patterns that most fit it. After that's sort of the first phase. Then I go and do the guide tracks. And basically what we do there is I first record the basic guitar riffs to a click track. And then when that's ready, we add the bass, for example, and the preliminary vocal lines, so that we have a clear idea of how the song is going to pan out. Everything to a click, no drums at that stage yet. And then the drums is recorded by Steve. When that's ready, sort of we have the final drum takes. We re-record the guitars, the bass, the vocals, and so forth. It's a lengthy and arduous process, but it's also good fun,
Yeah, I can understand it. Now, my question is, are you producing your own music? Are you have your own studio where you mix, master, and record everything yourself? Or do you actually go to an official studio to have this done? And if so, who's responsible for mixing, mastering, and producing your latest offering?
Well, when it comes to the recording per se, the process that I was describing earlier on, for these last 2 albums, I've been based at Steve's studio, which is called Hell Next Door Studios. Quite apt, I might add. And for this album, the mixing was commissioned to Marcus Yidel, who is guitarist for Avatarium and producer for Candlemas as well. And I got to know Marcus when Candlemas played with Forsaken, one of my bands here in Malta. No, actually, I got to know him before. He also features in a band called Doomsday Kingdom with Leif Edling from Candlemas, and I brought them over for the Malta Doom Metal Fest. and that's where we start building uh, some sort of productive friendship. And when it came to mixing this album, I wanted to sort of depart from the previous formula. Um, Previously, I had worked with for the mixing and mastering with David Vella, who's a very renowned producer in Malta. He handles Forsaken and Nomad Sun and other not just metal bands, but even a wide spectrum of bands from across different scenes, including the alternative scene. But for this album, I wanted Marcus on board, and it worked really well. We worked remotely, but very productively, and it was totally in sync with the soundscape I wanted to create this time, pushing the bass a bit more forward, pushing the vocals also a bit more forward, and the overall thing sounds fantastic. And the mastering then was done for the first time by CJ Grumark, who's an exceptional guitarist, and he owns a very good mastering suite in Norway. He's guitarist for the white metal band Narnia, who's quite famous in that scene.
Okay.
And I had first come across him again with Forsaken in a festival we played, a Christian metal festival called Brainstorm Fest in Holland. So that's how I got to know him.
That's quite interesting. And one thing I've noticed through your albums, you have the appearance, the artwork is of medieval times. That
Yeah.
seems to be your theme. That's a very interesting theme, and I'm curious to know who's creator of your artwork, who does your CD art.
Yeah. Basically, with Sacro Sanctus, so far I've dealt with historical themes, historical medieval and Middle Ages themes on all four albums. With the first three albums, the first trilogy, it relates to the rise and fall of the Knights Templar, so to speak. With the first album in 2014, I called Deus Volt, I sort of charting out the rise of the Knights Templar and their conflicts with different Islamic caliphates in the Middle East, obviously Jerusalem, Acre, and so forth. And then over the next two albums after that, Ad Eternum and Liber Tertius, what I did there was mostly focus on the conflict of the Knights Templar with ecclesiastical authorities, the Vatican, and also the French monarchy at the time, which was heavily indebted to the Knights Templar financially, and then they came up with this fantastic way of getting rid of them, accusing them of witchcraft and heresy and apostasy and so forth. And I rounded off that sort of concept over three albums. With this album, like I said, it's as I told you before we started the interview, it's a 700-year concept. It spans over 700 years, starting with an important historical character of the Dark Middle Ages called Charles Martel, who stopped the advancement of a very important Islamic and Saracen commander called Al-Rahman at the Battle of Tours, and sometimes it's also referred to the Battle of Poitiers in 732 AD. And then I sort of linked Charles Martel to his nephew Charlemagne, who you might have heard of, and also eventually culminating with Joan of Arc. What unites the three characters is the ownership of this famous sword of Fierbois, which is often attributed in historical myth and legend to Charles Martel, who sort of dedicated his victory to God at the chapel of Fierbois, of Saint Catherine of Fierbois, and also left his sword there in dedication to his victory, which was eventually several hundred years later unearthed by Joan of Arc. However, there's a fictional part to my concept as well, because the sword is also transferred to Charlemagne in his efforts to create the first Holy Roman Empire. So there's lots of historical characters in the album, and the artwork has to be fitting, of course. And in each album, we have these historical depictions. On this one, that's basically a mural dedicated to Joan of Arc, to the capture of Joan of Arc by the Burgundians, which is found in Paris. And the author is basically um, a famous author, French, sorry, the painter, sorry, the artist is called Jules Eugene Lenebveux. I'm trying to get the French correctly.
It's easier for you to say than me. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the detail. Yeah, that's excellent.
What Jovita did is then sort of edited a bit. There's some editing in the artwork, the front cover, but it's also interesting that the booklet includes various other historical depictions accompanying each song, because each song is a concept and deals with different historical figures or episodes, including, like I already mentioned, the Battle of Orleans, the Siege of Orleans. There's also reference to the Battle of Agincourt on For God, King and Country and Henry V. So there's lots of history in there, lots of research as well. That's what I didn't mention earlier on, but this album also entailed, as usual, but with even more intensity, lots of historical research, which is mixed with some myth and also fiction from my end.
That's interesting. Now, I have a question about your band logo, the Sacro Sanctus logo.
Yeah.
There's like an icon attached to the logo, and I'm interested to know who created that. Was that your creation, or no? Okay.
Luckily, I'm surrounded by some very good people, and one of them is Alexia Baldacchino, who's Maltese as well. She's also singer for how can I describe them? It's like a minimalist atmospheric band called Trista Arcane, and she's the partner of the keyboardist in Nomad Sun, and she's been sort of on board contributing to Sacro Sanctus in various ways. In fact, she also contributed some vocals on the first couple of albums.
That's nice.
Wow. Yeah. And the logo is her creation. Yeah. It's a Knights Templar symbol, Knights Templar cross.
Oh, okay. Okay. Knights Templar cross. Okay.
Yeah, and basically you also have in the middle of the Knights Templar cross a Maltese 8-pointed cross, which is also reference to obviously my origins.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. Thanks for pointing that out to me.
Now, so there's the Maltese cross in the middle of the Knights Templar cross.
That makes it very special. That's interesting. And the one thing I wanted to ask you, because basically you're more than a one-man band, but you're really a one-man band with a drummer. Now, are you a live performing band? Do you actually get out there to perform live, or are you more of a studio band?
No, I mean, so far I've always looked at Sacro Sanctus as a studio band.
Okay.
Obviously, to get the band in a live format, I need to recruit other musicians, and you have to balance that between either being productive on the songwriting front, or getting another band up and running. And I already have 3 other bands, so
you keep busy.
Yeah, I mean, to really get Sacro Sanctus up and running as a full-time sort of live band, touring abroad and all that, I have to let some other things go. And I'm not too sure whether I'm ready to do that at this stage yet, because there's a limit in terms of how much you can rehearse and do. I mean, I'm not a full-time professional musician. I have other work. I work at University of Malta as a lecturer there in sociology. So it's a balancing act, and it's not easy.
I understand that. I want to talk about COVID. Now, COVID is something I wouldn't think that we'd still be talking about, but from what I understand, in China, it is rising again. The level of people getting sick from COVID is on the rise again. So my question to you about this COVID is obviously, how have you dealt with it on a personal level? And also, has this helped you as far as focusing on Sacro Sanctus, as far as making new music? Has it given you more time to focus on this band than your other bands? Has it been a benefit to you because of maybe lockdowns or slow time because of any kind of issues with this COVID pandemic? Has it been a benefit to you, or do you find it to be a nuisance?
That's an interesting question. First of all, with China and the rising rates there, from what I know, and I'm quite a voracious reader, and I follow international news and stuff. The difficulty there is despite their total lockdown policy, they haven't really reached out with their inoculation, their vaccination program. So that's why they're still susceptible to the virus, I guess, more than other areas, at least for now.
I guess so.
Hopefully it will stay the same. Because for me personally now, COVID helped me to be really very productive. I think I wrote about 60 songs for future albums during the COVID period. Because
I believe it. Yeah.
Most of them were all posted on Facebook. So if somebody wants to just consult what I did, if they look in the video section, they can check that out. But obviously they're still it's just the music, just a guitar played to a drum track. So I was really productive because we went remote at work. All my lecturing was done remotely. I was rarely leaving the house because at a certain point in time, even all the restaurants, cafes, gigs were out of the picture totally. We weren't rehearsing with my other bands either, so I really had a lot of time at my disposal. And I decided rather to, sink in some sort of depression. Why not be creative and productive? And that's what I did. Obviously, it has created difficulties, especially in terms of, for example, the backlog in the industry with CD duplication or vinyl replication, and with going to the printers. There's always a backlog. The COVID backlog is still there, so it has hampered the industry somewhat.
Yes.
But in terms of creating space for productivity, yeah, definitely. It was a really productive time.
I would imagine so. That's why I asked that. Yeah. Now, the main reason why we're here to promote you and your new album is to inform the fans on how they could get copies of your music. So I would say that the best links to give them are all related to Metal on Metal Records. They have a shop. They have the Bandcamp. Go to metalonmetalrecords.bandcamp.com. Yeah.
Alternatively, I mean, there's wide distribution of the album. If you just key in Sword of Fierbois, Albert Bell, Sacro Sanctus on Google search or Bing or whatever, good search engine, you're likely to encounter lots of online shops where you can get the album, from Amazon.com, from Barnes and Noble, from more specialist shops as well in the US and elsewhere, also in Canada, Europe, Japan, and wherever. They can also, your listeners can also, your audience can also contact me directly at albertbell@rocketmail.com, and I can also ship the album.
Okay,
they can zone into our Albert Bell Sacro Sanctus Facebook page, or they can find us on Instagram now too. I've just set up an Instagram page. So you can get the album from various avenues, but I can also ship it out as well.
That's good news. And also, what is good news, I noticed on the Metal on Metal YouTube page, your latest video, I believe it's your latest video called Flight of the Witch, lyric
Which,
video. Yeah, it's
yeah,
good to see you have a video there. Would you like to talk about the making of this video and the possibility of having more music or lyrical videos or
yeah,
visualization
yeah. Well,
videos? Yeah,
yeah. I'm actually thinking about another lyric video soon for another track on the album. I'm not too sure which one yet, because they're all my babies and I like them quite a lot. But yeah, Flight of the Witch. That was basically there's a 1929 film used there related to the life of Joan of Arc. It's called I think it's translated as the marvelous life of Joan of Arc, and it's open source since it's a 1929 movie. So what we did, Jovita and I, and her husband Simone, who's the co-owner of Metal on Metal Records and an important partner in the process, we sort of selected the scenes which best accompany the lyrics. So a lot of the pre-production work was done by ourselves, and then we roped in a lyric video producer, a company called The Odd Media, and they sort of put everything together. The song also features, that song also features a guest doing some solos on that track. It's interesting because I believe he's also based in your area, somewhere around in Rochester, New York. It's called John Gallo from Orb Ruin. Very good doom band, perhaps
interesting.
one of the best contemporary doom bands from the US. So it was a pleasure to have him on board. I met him first at Orb Ruin's appearance in DSR, Dunkle Rise Festival in Germany in 2000, I think it was 2004, and we kept in contact since. And it was also always my idea to rope him on board as a guest on the album. This album features loads of guests. There are about 22 guests.
Wow,
Uh, either
that's
doing
quite
some
interesting.
either doing some vocal parts or some lead guitar parts or some guest keyboards. Amongst the guests, I've got John Gallo, who I already mentioned. There's also Marcus Hidel from Avatarium, and he also plays in Candlemas sometimes when they're playing live, and either Lars or Mape can't make it. He takes over either lead or rhythm guitar duties, and he did the solo for a song on the album um, called The Maiden from Lorraine. There's also Alan Jones from the famous new wave of British heavy metal band Pagan Altar. He does the solo for Imperator, and I also managed to get a very good friend of mine, Mantus from Venom, on board for the title track. He does rhythm guitar there, alongside my rhythm, and some fantastic solo work. So, yeah, there's loads of guests on the album.
Thank you for sharing that information with us. And earlier today, you sent me a beautiful picture of you with your bass guitar. Would you like to spend time talking about your bass and whatever other gear you'd like to even mention? Would you like to get into that?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I've got uh, quite a few guitars and basses at home, around a dozen really. Um, I've got an Aria, a limited edition Aria. It's one of the 150, which is the Cliff Burton Signature series, but I don't really use that. I use basically a standard Aria for stringer on this album. Then with regards to the guitar, um, there's three guitars there which I use. For the rhythm, it's a Gibson SG, Wyoming model, and there's also Schecter Diamond, which has this really deep sort of low-end sound, which I love. I love my guitars to be a bit bassy, as you might have noticed. Perhaps because I'm a bass guitarist, but it's still mid-rangey enough to cut through the mix nicely. Then for the because I've also got some solos on the album and obviously all the guitar melodies. For the melodies, I use an Aria Mac, which is not an expensive guitar, but I really find very sweet. I might decide to go for something different on the next album in terms of the guitar arsenal and bass arsenal I'm using. Um, but I'm pretty happy with the guitar sound and also the bass sound on the album.
Very good stuff. And earlier you mentioned other bands that you're associated with as Forsaken, Nomad Sun, and Ex Vandals. Do you have anything working with them for the future, or are you just concentrating right now on Sacro Sanctus?
No. I'm also always juggling between bands, and right now my focus is on obviously trying to ensure that the fullest of promotion possibilities possible for Sacro Sanctus, sort of Fierbois. But concurrently, I'm working with Ex Vandals on a new album. We've basically written all of it. There's just one song which I'm contributing and which we sort of have to go through, but all the rest are ready. Some titles include The Other Side of the Sun, Thanatos Rising from my end, and then there's stuff written by the other guitarist, Raish Cambry, who's one of the veterans in the scene here, and we've got some fantastic songs from his end as well, like Abyss into Nothingness, New Age Order. That's quite a few interesting songs. So hopefully we'll be working on this album next year. With Nomad Sun, there's a full album written, and basically we're going to start recording soon. I think the drums are up next. I think it's end of November, early December. I'll be doing the bass in February. So again, we're possibly looking at a 2023 release or an early 2024 release there. With Forsaken, we were mostly focusing on live shows this year. We had some couple of good live shows, very good live shows here in Malta. We had started writing some new stuff before COVID. COVID then sort of hampered, because Forsaken is more of a garage-based band. We sort of, at least for this album, this next album, our thinking was that we sort of, although either I or Sean would be the guitarist in Forsaken, would have the key ideas for a song. We sort of go through everything together in our studio. So it's a bit more laborious than the other bands. The other bands we tend to be, sometimes we also work remotely, and stuff like that. But I would guess that with Forsaken, we would start working on new material again next year.
Okay, well, I want to invite you to come back on Metal Meltdown when you have each of your bands have a new offering and you want to talk about it, promote it. I want to welcome you back on the Metal Meltdown to be able to talk about these.
That's great.
Yeah. I just do this. I only do this seasonally though because my livelihood. So my time frame is from November to March, maybe the end of March. So that's when I would be able to do the interviews. But I would love to have you back to talk about your music. And anytime you have a new release, you're always going to be welcome back.
Perfect, David. That's awesome, man. I appreciate it a lot.
Of course. And you were saying before that you were the founder and owner of the Malta Doom Metal Festival. Could you tell us when that all started and what gave you the idea to do this festival? Yeah.
Basically, I've hinted throughout the interview that sort of I've been visiting different festivals throughout Europe with either Forsaken or Nomad Sun. And one festival which I really loved playing in and then subsequently visiting nearly every year for nearly all subsequent editions was the Doomshow Rise Fest in Germany. Basically there you had, the strong sense of community, people from worldwide, from the US, from Japan, from Europe coming together and really building these strong bonds of friendship and community. So over time, I mean, DSR started in 2003. Around 2007, I was noticing that in Malta there was sort of a renaissance, if you want to call it like that, of the doom metal scene. Very early in the 90s in Malta, there was quite an active doom scene with three or four bands, apart from Forsaken, also um, really being productive, like Oblique Visions, Weeping Silence, Victims of Creation. And around the mid 2000s, all these bands came back. Plus, new sort of doom bands were coming to the fore, including Nomad Sun, that I've already mentioned. Also, some others like Dawn of Anguish, which was founded by Forsaken drummer Simeon Gutt. So I thought, could this be the possibility for um, pushing Malta as the hub for Southern European doom metal? And this was when the idea for the Malta Doom Festival sort of crept into my mind. And in, I think it was 2007, I sort of started organizing these mini fests called the Malta Doom Night. One of the editions featured on Silence from England. I wanted also to start experimenting with bringing bands over. Then in 2009, I said, why not, go for a full festival? I mean, it was much smaller when compared to subsequent editions, but it featured, I think, it was five Maltese bands and a foreign headliner, which was Dark Quarter, the epic progressive sort of dark doom band from Italy, fantastic band. And the first edition was a huge success, and then we started increasing the dose of international bands in each edition after that, which sort of went on for 10 years till 2018. After the 2018 edition, I decided to sort of have a break from it because it was becoming too difficult to juggle between the bands and the festival, and it was really draining my energy. I loved doing it for 10 years. I had loads of friends helping out in the process, like James Gauchi and Glenn Gauchi as well, plus loads of other people. And we had 10 very successful editions. I might rekindle it at a certain stage, but not for the short term, for sure, because it takes a lot of work. I
I
mean, in
hear
the
you.
last edition, the 2018 edition, for example, to give you an idea, there would be about 15 bands, and I would say about 11 of them would be foreign bands of a certain stature. So it takes a lot of logistics, lots of financing, um, loads and loads of work.
Yeah, and does it cost you a pretty penny to have this happen? Does it cost you money out of your
Yeah,
own pocket?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was costing us quite a lot. In fact, I think it was for the last three or four editions. We also managed to secure some funding from the National Arts Council here and Festivals Malta, which helped us to see the edition through. It was quite a substantial sponsor.
No, that's good then. That's good you had support on that. And Albert, would you like to say anything to your fans that are tuning in at this time? Is there anything that you would like to say to them?
Yeah, I would love your listeners, your audience to check Sacro Sanctus out. It's perhaps not the usual cup of tea that you might come across in the metal world, the metal world today. It's quite saturated. It's not super original, but I think it's a really a fitting tribute to all my influences from Motorhead, Venom, Black Sabbath, Saxon Priest, but at the same time wrapped in something which is a different take to what's going on in the scene now. Not fearing like going go over some boundaries. Obviously, it's all old school, and I will remain always faithful to that school of thought because basically it's the school of metal that I know and experienced. So for me, to a certain extent, it's not old school at all. It's pure, unbridled, raw heavy metal, not distilled, not commercial in any way. and it's basically a labor of love. This is just uh, a reflection of my passion for heavy metal, which hasn't waned over these past 40 plus years or so. I mean, even in the hardest of times, metal is possibly the best friend that you can have.
Yeah, and I really feel what you're saying there, and I really agree with it because it's not what I normally listen to, but it's definitely worth listening to and playing and having you on my show to talk about it. So, yeah, what my livelihood is, I sell ice cream, so I think of metal, I
Okay.
think of different flavors of metal, and what you have here is another flavor of metal. And if you have an open mind and listen to it, this is a really entertaining album that you have here. So, yeah, I have to agree with what you said right there. So, I feel what you're saying, and I have to agree with it.
So I could possibly come to the States one day to New York, and would be there in a park, and this ice cream van would be passing by playing Sword of Fierbois.
Yeah, right, right.
That's even
It's,
more enticing. Really love to visit the States one day.
yeah, I
I
hope you
haven't
can do it.
yet.
Yeah, yeah, you have ice cream of your choice. There's not a problem about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I appreciate you being here today, and I want to thank you for spending time with us on Metal Meltdown on Metal Messiah Radio. I do believe that you brought a lot of information to us. I really appreciate that. You definitely had something to say, and everything was making sense. Everything, it was really important that what you said. So I totally appreciate that, and thank you for being here, Albert. For the Albert Bell's Sacro Sanctus new offering, sort of Fierbois. Yeah, I want to wish you a great 2023, and may you stay healthy out there and have continued success. You're very talented, and I appreciate the chance to get to talk to you, and I look forward to the future possibilities to talk about your other bands when they are ready to talk about. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and get this interview.
thank
And
you.